Here's the reality. The Buffalo shooter isn't a lone wolf. He's a mainstream Republican.
In political terms, this policy is called the Great Replacement, the replacement of legacy Americans with more obedient people from faraway countries. In other words, you're being replaced, and there's nothing you can do about it. So shut up!
One thing that's really fucking gross about this is he drove 3.5 hours to go to Buffalo. When you have to drive 3.5 hours to find a place where the replacement is supposedly happening, Jesus Christ, get a clue. It's like you get bullied at school and you come home and beat up your little brother. You beat up someone even more powerless than you, so you feel strong instead of taking on the actual threat, which is global capital. The psychotic GOP, it has basically become explicitly white supremacist. And this is something that I've been saying for a while, is that there's nothing really separating Tucker Carlson from this shooter. The only difference between the two is that this guy actually took a step. But if you look at the actual thought and belief behind the action, he's just a mainstream conservative at this point. He is what the Republican Party is. Somebody showed me a picture of conservative Reddits. This is CIA as fuck. Glows in the dark. This whole thing glows. Fake setup, narrative shaping. FBI getting lazy with their storylines. If you don't know what Glowies means, in the aftermath of the January 6th riot, extremists have become obsessed with federal agents who might lurk among them, posting widely and worried about spies in their midst. Glowies, that's the term far-right groups use to describe people they suspect of being federal law enforcement agents or informants infiltrating their communication channels. So they're trying to honk, by the way. This is Groyper shit. This is far-right shit. It's just normal shit. Massively upvoted. It's sick how the media and its masters are pushing such an agenda. I wonder who they mean by the media's masters. They're certainly not talking about capitalism, chat. It's crazy how active shooters claim they are conservatives and the conservatives run around and say the shooter is an agent of the FBI or CIA. Fucking wild. Because that's how they avoid the cognitive dissonance. That's how they avoid facing reality. Also, on the one hand, they want to call them glowies or agents or false flags. But on the other hand, they want to cheer it on. That's the secret.
Brittany, I have been watching your Twitter feed all day. You have been paying homage to the victims, talking about their lives. Tell me what you are making as you watch this all unfold.
Well, like you said, Alicia, I am thinking of the families of Andre McInerney, Haywood Patterson, Celestine Chaney, Roberta Drury, Pearlie Young, Aaron Salter Jr., Ruth Whitfield, Kat Massey, and the other folks who have been affected by this, the entire community. I've been listening very closely to the voices of those who are from Buffalo and who live in Buffalo, especially in this community. As you said, it is a historically Black community. And this grocery store, Tops, was a center for that community. The community actually fought for decades to get this store, which is the only grocery store, the only full grocery store in a community that—
Guys, I have an awful story for you. I watched my brother fall into the Groyper rabbit hole myself. His bad family experiences, mental health problems, loneliness, and poverty made him into a Nazi. He started in 2012 with Ancient Aliens, 2014 with anti-SJW and 4chan. I don't want to help him. He's too brain rotted. I think the thing about the far right that enough people don't talk about is it's flattering. It's an ego stroke, right? Like, I'm a white man, so my fellow racial comrades built X, Y, and Z impressive thing, so it's not so bad that I'm a failure. That's basically what it comes down to. You can have pride in others' accomplishments, and you can kind of slide into the background of your own story because you're focused on preserving that thing that's under threat, even though it doesn't make any sense. You know, like Nick Fuentes is like half Latino. What do you mean white? You know, the concept of whiteness is a plastic and changeable concept. And if it's plastic and changeable, it doesn't really have the virtues that its proponents think that it does. Isn't it a self-report where the right wing calls this a CIA op? The CIA wouldn't just make it up unless it was believable that they would do it. What do you think about the Azov connection to the Buffalo shooting? I think that Azov Battalion is far right, and I think this guy is far right. And they're fellow travelers. Now, they may not have directly helped him, but that's what the Azov Battalion believes. They believe that they are in the front lines fighting against the Asiatic hordes and protecting white civilization. That's what they explicitly say. This Buffalo shooter thinks killing random black people is helping prevent white replacement. He's got the same logic behind his action. Also, you're not dumb and insignificant. You're smart because you know the truth about the mainstream media, etc., etc. And that's an ego stroke. That's an ego stroke. Is when you say, I have the secret knowledge, I'm smarter than the sheeple, then you are able to kind of set yourself above. Again, doesn't matter that you're a failure, doesn't matter that society has abandoned you. And I think a lot of the far right, there is material reasons why it's attractive. Like if you feel self-actualized, far right ideology is not going to be interesting to you. You're going to want to explore the world's infinite diversity. If you're feeling secure, if you're feeling respected and socially upheld, if you feel like what you do matters, you're going to want to seek out other experiences. You're going to want to seek out beauty. You're not going to be sitting there worried about smashing things and killing. It's because he feels under threat and he's got to turn that on to others.
That was otherwise affected by food apartheid. They finally organized and got this grocery store opened in 2003. This is not only where people bought food for their families, it's where they paid bills. It's where they got food stamps and received SNAP benefits. It's where people were able to access because it was on a bus line, and it was where people knew your name. People often talked about Aaron Salter Jr. greeting them, the security guard greeting them and making jokes with them about the rickety shopping carts as they walked in. These are the memories that people are carrying with them through what could have been prevented. And I want to be very clear about this. White supremacy is a systems project. It is very tempting to individualize this. It is very tempting to call this simply a tragedy. We're already seeing these mental illness narratives all over the place. But in truth, radicalization requires books and copycat manifestos, tech platforms, meeting places, political parties, media, and content to develop the kind of people who would go and commit this kind of horror. The system was successful and an entire community is suffering for it. And we need to wrap our arms around that community as we challenge our lawmakers and our leaders to shift the system that continues to create these outcomes.
Rick, let's talk about those lawmakers. Let's talk about those leaders, and let's talk about what Brittany describes as a system problem, because it's not just Fox News. You have GOP lawmakers echoing this, quote, great replacement theory, including New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. Back in September, Albany's Times Union editorial board wrote, quote, Stefanik isn't so brazen as to use the slogans themselves. Rather, she couches the hate in alarmist, anti-immigrant rhetoric that's become standard fare for the party of Donald Trump. And she doesn't quite attack immigrants directly. Instead, she alleges that Democrats are looking to grant citizenship to undocumented immigrants in order to gain a permanent liberal majority, or as she calls it, a permanent election insurrection. I would add to all of that, Rick, that just this past week, as we were talking about the baby formula shortage, you had Republican elected officials saying, well, the reason that we don't have enough formula for our American citizen babies is because you have formula going to immigrant babies that are in detention. That line runs through all of their rhetoric.
I mean, this just happened. This has happened on Friday. They were just like, hey, how dare you feed illegal criminals? And they were talking about babies.
How dangerous is it? Not just coming from Fox News, not just coming from the far reaches of the internet, but coming from some of the top brass of the Republican Party.
Well, it's extremely dangerous and it's horrific. I mean, this was an act of domestic terrorism, nothing else. I saw your Chiron a moment ago said racially motivated. That's a euphemism. It was a racist act of terrorism. And this idea, the great replacement theory, is like the Mein Kampf of white supremacists. It basically suggests that white Christian Americans are being replaced by people of color and by immigrants. And unfortunately, this is something that's been around in our history for hundreds of years. I mean, back in the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan had 5 to 6 million members who were lynching people of color. So this is a noxious thing. And for politicians on the right, Republicans, to use some of this language between the lines, it does stoke hatred in a young man like this who basically has access to these racist creeds, basically has access to assault weapons and body armor, and then made access and drove 200 miles to shoot black people. I mean, it's really an appalling thing.
Matt, this month, New York Times reported on the racist rhetoric on Tucker Carlson's Fox show. It reads, quote, at a moment when white backlash is the jet fuel of a Republican Party striving to return to power in Washington, Carlson has become the preeminent champion of Americans who feel most threatened by the rising power of Black and brown citizens. To channel their fear into ratings, Mr. Carlson has adopted the rhetorical tropes and exotic fixations of white nationalists who have watched gleefully from the fringes of public life as he popularizes their ideas. Talk to me, Matt, about how Fox News amplifies these extreme views that you used to only find in the dark corners of the internet.
You don't need to read this guy's manifesto. You can just turn on Fox News at 8 p.m. any given weekday, and you will see the same themes, the same idea that American diversity is destroying the country, the same fear of an invasion of migrants across the southern border, and the same great replacement conspiracy theory. He's doing it all, and because he is so influential at Fox and within the conservative movement, what he decides to popularize spreads throughout both of them. Tucker Carlson is doing exactly what his bosses want. They want his blood-soaked conspiracy theories. If they didn't, they would have stopped it by now, but they've decided not to.
You tell me if Tucker Carlson endorsed this and promoted the Buffalo shooter.
Now, I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it. That's true. Let's say that again for emphasis, because it is the secret to the entire immigration debate. Demographic change is the key to the Democratic Party's political ambitions. In other words, you're being replaced and there's nothing you can do about it. So shut up. I mean, they're trying to change the population of the United States. And they hate it when you say that because it's true. Our country's being invaded by the rest of the world. Let me just state unequivocally, the country's being stolen from American citizens as we watch. In political terms, this policy is called the Great Replacement, the replacement of legacy Americans with more obedient people from faraway countries.
I mean, it's nonstop. Like, this is just literally what the guy believes. And the Great Replacement theory is largely, it means nothing because it doesn't make sense. Because most Latinos in this country are fucking white. So what, we're replacing white people with white people? What's the strategy here? What the fuck are you even talking about? This is nothing garbage. Nothing really came the last time Tucker Carlson was under fire about his rhetoric. Remember when advertisers left his show in 2018 because he said he was making our country dirtier and it didn't fucking mean shit? Legacy Americans could be exchanged with property owning white males and the meaning wouldn't change. No fucking shit. No fucking shit. The hate is blatantly out in the open. Here's the reality. The Buffalo shooter isn't a lone wolf. He's a mainstream Republican. The right-wing extremists who control the modern GOP are all gripped by a racist delusion. The shooter is just the latest to act on it. There's no such thing as a lone wolf, an appellation often given in error to terrorists who act alone, particularly those of the white supremacist variety. There are only people who fed a steady violent propaganda and stochastic terror take ancillary rhetoric to its logical conclusion. Annihilatory rhetoric. Such was the case on Saturday when a teenage white supremacist named Peyton Genron opened fire on a supermarket in a black neighborhood in Buffalo, New York, killing 10 people while live streaming the carnage on the live video site Twitch. One thing that's really fucking gross about this is he drove 3.5 hours to go to Buffalo. When you have to drive 3.5 hours to find a place where the replacement is supposedly happening, Jesus Christ, get a fucking clue. He wasn't alone. There was an entire message board and several discords hyping him up. Yeah. Prior to the shooting, he had posted a 180-page manifesto in which he laid out his rationale clearly. He was adherent of what was called Great Replacement theory, the idea that white people in the United States and white majority countries around the world are being systemically, deliberately outbred and replaced by immigrants and ethnic minorities in a deliberate attempt to rid the world of whiteness. Now, let me ask you a question for those idiots who stumble upon this. Who is making white people not have more children? Is it the Republican Party that loves the student loan crisis that we're in? Is it the Republican Party who signed free trade agreements and sent good union jobs overseas? Is any of the right-wing politicians like Tucker Carlson or Donald Trump doing anything to rebuild the working class in this country? I'll give you a hint. They're fucking not. They serve wealth. You're blaming, you think opioid crisis happened because of brown people? Why do you think people are killing themselves in Scranton and West Virginia and Reading? Is it because of somebody moving across the border in Texas? No, you fucking idiot. It's because their jobs have been destroyed. They live in a constant state of despair. The Sackler family, those parasites, profited off of spreading synthetic opioids all over the country. It's the CIA openly protecting opioid manufacturers in Afghanistan and around the world so that they could fund their far-right pro-capital death squads all over the fucking world. That's the actual reality. It's capitalism, bro. It's destroying every piece of freedom and equality this country has ever had. And pointing your finger at black people is some of the most pathetic loser shit. It's like you get bullied at school and you come home and beat up your little brother. You beat up someone even more powerless than you so you feel strong instead of taking on the actual threat, which is global capital, which is fucking killing this planet. You turn away from the facts because global capital is too powerful for you. You don't want to really fight a real threat. You don't really want to change the system. You want to punch down on the powerless so you feel strong because you're weak and pathetic. It's a conspiracy theory that has inspired terror attacks in New Zealand and Pittsburgh, San Diego, and El Paso. An ideology that marries demographic panic with the idea of a cunning, nefarious plot. What is white? What is white? I've never heard these white supremacists define white. What is white? If it's being replaced, you got to tell me what it is first. Wasps? This motherfucker isn't a wasp. I've been some of the worst fucking places that are filled with mostly poor white people, and the main things I saw is drug abuse and white supremacist-oriented violence and crime. Many U.S. small towns are hauled the fuck out for a long time, and they're hauled the fuck out because of global capitalism. Literally, my childhood with my Asperger's older brother beating the shit out of me after he got home from school getting bullied. Yes, that's exactly what weak, pathetic losers do. Is they either join in the bullying as a little sidekick or they bully someone else who's smaller and weaker because they know they can't stand up to the actual problem. White is simply the absence of color. What does that mean? To me, I can tell you right now, an Italian, a Pole, they weren't historically considered white. An Irish person, they weren't white. A Scandinavian, they weren't white. Now, Hitler, he loved Nordics. You know, Hitler loved Nordics. So, but that's the fucking 30s. You're telling me whiteness was developed in the 30s? Whiteness doesn't make sense. The United States of America is a nation of mongrels, meaning people come from all over the world and they marry and intermix with each other. That's what America is. Whiteness means nothing. Right now, Russians are not fully white because it's all politics. It's always politics. I live in the heart of conservative Trump land, and I tell you why they're mad and why they feel replaced is because so many of them have failed in life. Failed they knew when they were white. They had every advantage given to people today. They can't live with the failure, so they blame everyone else. 3/4 of my family is like this, and I still see it almost daily. Almost also know some of these people live in a land gifted them by Uncle Sam and still failed. By the way, it's not their fault. I'm different than a liberal. I'm not a liberal, chat. I know it's not your fault. It's not your fault. If everybody is failing in the state of Pennsylvania and Ohio and in Indiana and Michigan, it's not because of personal failings. Believing that is stupid. The system is rigged for the capitalist class. It's a big club and you're not in it. If a white person and a black person have a child, the child is not considered white because whiteness is a racist concept. No shit. I'm asking you what a white person is. Is there a clip of Hassan explaining whiteness after the C-word debate? Whiteness as a concept, just to give you my answer, is a purely political invention used to separate a politically a significant population away from a subgroup that's being exploited for the purpose of those in power. For the longest time, Italians and Irish weren't white, but as soon as they became numerous enough, they got retconned into whiteness. The purpose is to maintain a political majority so that you can exploit the non-whites. Why is this shooter being described as a teenager when POC of the same age are described as men? It's called white supremacy. He talked about it yesterday. At what point did poor European people that used to rebel against the ones that forced them to work land they didn't own and die with nothing of their own? What was it that turned their hearts so that they had started to identify with those in power? Even though they're powerless, identify with wealth when they're broke. It's the invention of whiteness. Well, LBJ had a quote. Here's the LBJ quote. As President Lyndon Johnson said in the 60s to a young Bill Moyers, If you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him somebody to look down on and he'll empty his pockets for you. That's what it's about. It's about manipulating these dummies so they serve the interests of capital. You're kept apart and you may be separately fleeced of your earnings. You were made to hate each other because upon that hatred is rested the keystone of the arch financial despotism, which enslaves you both. You are deceived and blinded that you may not see how this race antagonism perpetuates a monetary system which beggars both. Exactly. He was the adherent of what is called Great Replacement Theory, the idea that white people in the United States and white majority countries around the world are being systemically, deliberately outbred and replaced by immigrants and ethnic minorities in a deliberate attempt to rid the world of whiteness. It's a conspiracy theory that has inspired terrorist attacks in New Zealand and Pittsburgh, San Diego, and El Paso, an ideology that marries democratic panic with the idea of a cunning, nefarious plot. Reading through the document, what struck me hardest, however, was how very close the killer's ideas were to the American mainstream, the white hat core of American politics. 5 years ago, when white supremacists walked down the streets of Charlottesville chanting "Jews will not replace us" and carrying tiki torches, few people understood their intent. The fact that they were referring to replacement theory, the idea seemed outlandish, even incomprehensible at the time. It was a fairly obscure rallying cry based around a 2012 book by French novelist Renaud Camus, fear-mongering about a non-white majority Europe. Absorbed in the fetid stew of white supremacist cant, where it acquired a vicious anti-Semitism. For many white supremacists, it is Jews who are orchestrated the reverse colonization, as Camus put it, of white countries, in order to more easily manipulate a non-white and therefore more malleable general populace. Gedron's manifesto, after explaining in detail why he picked a particular supermarket he did, it was in a majority black neighborhood with a majority black clientele. He felt to explain why he did not choose to attack Jews. Jews can be dealt with in time, but the high fertility replacers will destroy us now. It is a matter of survival we destroy them first, he wrote, before listing his weaponry in detail with price points included, a manual for future murderers. Well, Gendron's choice to engage in mass murder puts him on the radical fringe of those who enforce their beliefs with bullets. His overt anti-Semitism differs slightly from the vaguer blame of elites, Democrats, and globalists. His fixation on white birth rates and demographic change are neither fringe nor particularly unusual. And I've been talking about this before, chat. There's a guy, a Canadian immigrant to America by the name of Mark Steyn. I read his book. I read one of his books. It's called America Alone. It predicted in 2006 that the downfall of Western civilization due to internal weaknesses in the Muslim population growth in Western countries. He predicted that there would be 150 million Muslims in Europe by 2015, when there was 20 million in 2006. The answer in 2016 was that there were 25 million. There were 25 million, not 150 million, as he predicted, but 25 million from 20 in 2006 to 25 by 2016. He's totally fucking wrong. Objectively, measurably wrong. It's not happening. And it's not happening on the timeline they say it's happening. Also explained in his manifesto that although Turks could be considered white by their skin tones, they are not white by a factor of Islam. Dude unknowingly just proved that whiteness as a concept isn't real and is malleable to prove a point. You're not white if you are Islamic. Really genetically rooted, right, chat? Really indelible and not at all made up. His fixation on white birth rates and demographic change are neither fringe nor particularly unusual. The gnawing fear of a minority white America has utterly consumed conservative politics for the past half decade, creating a Republican Party whose dual obsessions with nativism and white fertility have engendered a suite of policies engineered to change the nature of the Bali politic. What unites murders like Gendron and the long list of white supremacist attackers he cited with admiration with the mainstream of the Republican Party is the dream of a white nation. The demographics of the United States are changing, and the share of population considered white is shrinking. This change is occurring faster than anticipated thanks to the relative ages of white and non-white populations in the country. The non-white population trends significantly younger, and all national population growth is being driven by non-white groups. This confluence of death, birth, and immigration in and of itself morally neutral and a matter of the natural ebb and flow of populations over time. But as the era of the white majority nears its end, a revanchist racist right has treated the facts of demography as an occasion for sweeping violent moral panic. And there is no evidence, by the way. First of all, what does white mean? White changes. As a chatter rightly pointed out, you could say a Lebanese person is white or a Turk is white. or a Moroccan is white? Is a Swede white? Is a Pole white? Is a Russian white? Is a Greek white? What the fuck is white? Is a Portuguese person white? What the fuck is white? You think if the shooter did a 23andMe and found out his DNA was 3% Nigerian? I mean, who knows, man? Donald Trump's ascendance was a key marker of the force of white racial panic. From the moment he launched his candidacy, his overt racism set the party's agenda, and from the very first, his rhetoric directly provoked racist violence. Far from ebbing as Trump has ceased to be the party's sole center, however, the tide of white animus has become even more central to a new crop of congresspeople and their candidates. You have an obligation to like, comment, and subscribe.